So let's take a look under the hood in the CRUD application. This is a special version of CRUD that uses the MySQLi interface. The version of CRUD as I originally wrote it uses the PDO interface, and that's the interface that I prefer, and that's the version that I will maintain. I created this separate version to demonstrate how the MySQLi interface works. And so this is the MySQLi version of CRUD. This is the line here where the database is initialized. This is where we set up the connection to MySQL. And so it creates a MySQLi object. We're using the object interface of MySQLi. MySQLi has both an object interface and a procedural interface, or a non-object interface. We're using the object interface to MySQLi. The code looks a little bit different, but it works pretty much the same. And if you can follow along with this, if you see code that's procedural using MySQLi, it should be obvious what it does. So this sets up the MySQL connection. It provides the host name, the username, the password, and the database. The host name is a variable, and that's set up here, and it's set to be localhost. It's set to the literal value localhost because CRUD is not designed for a production environment. It's only designed for a personal testing environment, and so we really only want to run it on localhost. We're not going to run it on a remote host ever. It sets up the database is also set up to Album here. And the username and the password and the database are all set up at the top of the program, and here they are. And those are constants, they're not variables. So a couple of things to note about the MySQLi interface here. One is that MySQLi does not support persistent connections with the default MySQL driver. Persistent connections are very useful in a web environment. What a persistent connection is, it's a connection between the web server and the database server that stays active and stays alive and does not need to be created every time there's a web connection. Without persistent connections, every time somebody brings up a web page, even if it's the same user in the same session, from page to page, there's a whole new instance of the web server and there's a whole new instance of the program. And that new instance actually has to create its own connection to the database server. And this takes time and resources. Persistent connections reuse the connections so they don't have to be set up every time. And that every time can be a lot, especially in a busy web environment. So I consider persistent connections vital. And they're not supported by MySQLi in the default configuration. And there's actually very, very few configurations where it will work. Another thing to keep in mind is that there's a bug in versions of MySQLi before PHP version 5.3 that do not allow the use of the connect error function. And so instead we have to do our errors this way. And so this is just the buggy nature of the code. MySQLi is still being actively supported and developed, but not very actively. The developers are really paying more of attention to PDO, and so that's the more reliable code. So we have to do a few little things like this to work around some of the problems in MySQLi. So this is the code that sets up the connection. It's actually very simple. You create an object using the standard new object syntax in MySQL, and it puts the object in this variable called DBH. It's called DBH for traditional reasons. That's just the traditional name of a database handle. And so I like to use traditional names for things because it's easier to read the code later when I come back to it and I haven't seen it for a while. I can know pretty much instantly what it is that it's doing. So this is how the connection is set up. If the connection setup fails, it calls the error function, which is an internal function that exists in the CRUD application for displaying errors in red on the screen. And it uses this @ sign to prevent PHP from throwing an error to the screen, and it allows us to use our own error reporting mechanism. So that's pretty much it. That's the initialization code for setting up the database connection using MySQLi in PHP.